case of the
The boom of opportunities and success in the United States drew many eyes from around the world, especially those that were seeking change. The Chinese, in particular, seemed to be induced by the stories of prosperity that came from America, and many chose to leave behind their life in poverty in China to seek success in the United States.
The Chinese faced many push and pull factors as they were considering whether to make the journey to California or stay in China. One of the many pull factors was the discovery of gold in California, which sparked the California gold rush. Many people were lured in by stories of instantaneous wealth that spread through the Pacific Ocean, and within 2 years, 25,000 Chinese immigrants arrived in California.
However, the dreams of those that traveled to the United States in search of on-the-spot wealth quickly lost their billions. They worked as miners. However, faced with monthly taxes because of their immigrant status, they had no choice but to pay if they wanted to mine for gold. On top of that, it was common for these immigrants to be violently targeted in the mining camps. Many of these Chinese immigrants did not receive the instant wealth that they traveled to California for.
Another major pull factor in the Chinese immigration was the work on the Transcontinental Railroad. Many of the Chinese heard of this work in the United States and decided to swap out their lives of poverty in work and pay in the United States of America.
From 1863 to 1869, approximately 15,000 Chinese workers were sent to help with the Transcontinental Railroad. Many of these workers were sent to the Sierra Nevada mountains, in which they mined for days at a time, only covering inches.
To increase the efficiency and maximize progress, railroad workers mining through mountains had to use nitroglycerin, which was banned from being transported after 15 men were blown to bits. Being 13 times more powerful than gunpowder, if the sites lacked a chemist to create it, the Chinese were tasked with concocting and applying it. It was estimated that 1,500 Chinese laborers died due to explosions and landslides.
Like many minorities that immigrated to the U.S., the Chinese were faced with oppression and detest from white people in the U.S., though they were given the most dangerous jobs while constructing the Transcontinental Railroad, and they were paid 30% to 50% less than the white workers, and they lived in tents while the white workers were accommodated with train cars. But they made up 90% of the Central Pacific's workforce, and they received little to no credit.
As the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad drew to an end, some of the Chinese chose to return to China with the money they had earned. However, most chose to stay in the United States. The Chinese formed about 25% of the California workforce, formed about a third of California's commercial farms, and made up about 70% of laborers in wooden mills and cigar factories.
Despite the hard work that the Chinese immigrants put into the United States, they were still faced with an unbearable amount of racism. On the local level, they were treated poorly in their communities and jobs. Although they were becoming a huge part of the American workforce, they were still extremely underpaid because of their title as immigrants. Oosh!
As Chinese presence grew in America, so did anti-Chinese discrimination. Some of this racism was due to ethical and cultural prejudices. Many people feared that the low wages that were accepted by the Chinese may be a threat to their own income being diminished. On top of this, after the Panic of 1873, the financial crisis that resulted in job shortages, organized political resistance continued to rise.
There were also resistance in politics against the Chinese immigrants implemented at the national level, which we can see in the Chinese Exclusion Act, passed in 1882. The Chinese Exclusion Act completely prohibited Chinese workers from entering the country for 10 years.
It also stated that current Chinese residents could not apply for citizenship and were at risk of being deported by the courts. Chinese immigrants that had left the country previously found it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to re-enter. And after its 10-year period was over, the government renewed the act and extended it to ban immigrants from Hawaii and the Philippines.
The U.S. continued to place bans on the entry of Chinese immigrants until the year 1943, where a law was passed that allowed U.S. residents of Chinese immigrant descent to apply for citizenship. But national quotas continued to be implemented, which restricted immigration from China and other countries until the Immigration Act of 1990.
In our past, Chinese immigrants were faced mostly with difficult times and persecution as they did their best to navigate the new country that spoke a different language. Now that progress has been made, the achievements of the Chinese are now being acknowledged in the way they should have been in the 19th century.
Ángel la ciencia.
The Chinese were immigrants spreading from the country in pursuit of richness. It attracted many. Golders had the Chinese in a frenzy, worked for long hours, men no more cash, never got a fork, always swinging that axe.
They did all the work, but they were forgotten. Yeah, I did all the work, but they were forgotten. Building a railroad, yeah, the work was mental. Across the whole country, it was transcontinental. Debts were stacking, toll kept adding. They did all the work, but they were forgotten. Yeah, I did the work, but they were forgotten.
Families in their heart had them working real hard. Couldn't do nothing, yet they had to restart. Couldn't go home, yet their life was subpar. But with little profits, it was bizarre. They was bottom of the econ chart. Transcontinental was detrimental. Got them feeling like a rental.
Work for hours every day in scorching heat and little pay. They did all the work, but they were forgotten. Yeah, they did the work, but they were forgotten. Railroad yelling their name. It was a gambling game. Had them rushing for gold. Americans knew they would fold.